Good morning. Hi, I'm JJ Lee, and I'm the author of The Measure of a Man, the story of a father, a son, and a suit. And I wanted to talk about an idea, this first idea for this first episode, that could change the way you write memoir and think about yourself in life as a person. It's what I call the writer, narrator, main character split. And it's a powerful idea that can change how you approach your character, your writing, and even how you look at the past. The main idea is I'm the writer, you're the writer, we're here, I'm making a video, you're watching a video. The second you stop watching this video, you may start writing. What you put down on the page in the first person produces a narrator that is distinct from the person that watched the video that is actually doing the writing. Why it's distinct is because the writer is never quite the narrator. There's actually a personality distinction between the two. One is lived, the writer. The other is produced, the narrator, through the typing. More importantly, when the narrator starts telling a story about their main character in the first person using I, what they're really doing is talking about an earlier version of themselves. So the writer is actually using the narrator to tell a story about an earlier version of their self or themselves. And so that means that there's actually a difference. There's time and space between the writer and the main character produced by the narrator. Narrator tells a story as it's written on the page, and that story is about the main character who ostensibly looks like the writer because they use the word I as the subject. But what makes it so important is that the writer is not the main character and need not be the main character. When you speak about yourself in the past, or if the writer speaks about them in the past, you can treat them in some ways like a stranger. And in some ways, they actually are a stranger. We're often alienated from our earlier selves. So if you write a story of a coming of age, let's say, and you're 16 years old, and you're 40 years old, and you're writing about this time when you were 16, you have the ability, once you identify that you are not that person, first of all, to express a lot of empathy for that 16-year-old in a way that a lot of new memoir writers tend not to see their main character, because in a way there's maybe an element of self-loathing that's playing a role in how they portray or see themselves. So by actually embodying who you really are, the 40-year-old looking upon the 16-year-old, you're able to muster a kind of insight and perspective that the 16-year-old could never have. And I'll have an example of that at the end. The other thing that's really important about the writer, narrator, main character distinction is that you can also produce an interesting narrator who, as they narrate, changes through time. Because as we know, there's something called the observer effect. When you look at something, looking at something changes the thing that you look at. And so when we look at our past through our contemporary selves, the mature adult that you are now looking at the past, you can have all sorts of insights and understandings about the past that you could never have as a 16-year-old main character. The more you write about the past, the more you understand about the past, and that begins to change how you see it. So not only is the past changing, the writer is changing, and that's going to be reflected in the narrator. So what you can do as a memoirist is actually start the narrator not at the exact moment that the writer is in. So let's say the writer has accumulated a certain insight or understanding about their life before they start writing the memoir. You don't necessarily want to start there in the narrator. The narrator might be more closely aligned to the main character in terms of age or perspective. So you can, let's say an event happened in 2015, right? And now it's 2023. And you want to tell the story of coming of age, and somehow that coming of age influences your adult life. So you could start telling the story from the perspective of yourself in 2020, or even 2022, a year before you started writing. That little bit of space allows you, as you begin to write, to change who you are on the page as a narrator. So the narrator has insights about the past, and they reveal it and they expose themselves. So they make it quite plain to the reader, right, via the narratee, who is the person that's read to, the imaginary person that's being spoken to by the narrator. The reader can see the narrator change, and by seeing the narrator change, they see the writer change, because writing memoir is obviously a transformative effect. So you can actually have two developing characters if you engage in the writer-narrator main character split. And it's super, super powerful. I'm going to give you an example now, personal one. When I was writing The Measure of a Man, the story of a father, a son, and a suit, my editor came up to me and the draft was done and said, your teen years seems to be missing a part. And there's not enough from your teen years. And it was difficult for me because I couldn't explain to her that a lot of my teen years have been blanked out. There were a lot of missing pieces in my memory and in my mind. So what happened was I started talking about the time I punched my father, knocked him out. And I had never done this before. I started talking about how it felt to see the 16-year-old knocking his father out. And a whole different feeling came over me. And this is, the writer talking about the narrator, talking about the main character who's 16 years old knocking his father out with their editor. And I suddenly had this really powerful feeling about what it would be like to be in that room watching myself, my younger self, knock out my father in a boxing match. It wasn't quite a fight. And I began I started writing it actually, and I began to sob because I wrote the line, "I wonder now if I had just given him a hug." And the reason why I wrote that is because I'm punching my father and he's staggering. And in a moment of choice, I knocked him out with a final punch. But I froze that moment in my mind as the writer, and I expressed it as the narrator. And I wondered what would have happened if I just gave him a hug instead. And it opened up a whole new emotional dimension to the work, and I hope you find the opportunity to read it. It is online, that part of the book. And it really changed me. It changed how I looked at my father. It changed how I dealt with the guilt around my father, even though he was a troubled man himself. And so that's the real power, is that you begin to understand you are no longer the main character. You're wiser, you're stronger, you're more capable, and you have a kind of insight within you now, and the ability not only to forgive the people that caused you pain in your story, because usually that happens in a memoir, but you also have time to forgive the main character, the early version of yourself, who may have done things wrong, or was even only blamed for feeling pain and hurt at the time. It's really powerful. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take an opportunity to show you some examples in the next video about how the writer, narrator, main character split can really provide a reflective engine to your memoir and really change how you approach the structure and the storytelling. It's a really powerful tool. Hi, it's JJ. I'll be back with another Coffee and Memoir next Monday.